Mike Wallace with another television portrait in our gallery of colorful people. Our guest is one of the 10 wealthiest men in America. He is Huntington Hartford, grandson and heir of the founder of the A&P retail empire. His hobby is money and how to use it. His varied interests are expressed in such projects as the Huntington Hartford Playhouse in Los Angeles, his Art Colony Foundation for Worthy Talents, a gallery of modern art soon to be constructed in New York, and an employment agency for fashion models. Take a street corner poll anywhere in America on the question, what problems occupy most of your time? And the nearly unanimous answer, I imagine, would be money. Huntington Hartford, however, has had a unique money problem. How to spend it. Hunt, in a recent Sunday News feature about you, there's an estimate by your own lawyer that you are worth something over $500 million. Now, of course, he might be off $1 million or $2 million, but that is still a fairly impressive figure. Is it an accurate figure?
Well, it's not quite accurate, Mike. I think it's slightly exaggerated by about $420 million, because I think I'm probably worth about $80 million. As a matter of fact...
wait. This is your own lawyer who has said $500 million. I dare say this lawyer...
I doubt very much if it was my lawyer. I'm afraid he may have been misquoted.
Oh, I see.
Because actually, I was worth around $40 million, having 10% of the A&P stock about 3 or 4 years ago. But the stock is about, I guess, almost doubled in that period of time, so I'm probably worth about $80 million now.
Do you still hold your stock, or is it none of my business?
I hold about half of it because I sold about half of it just a few months ago.
Do you work at anything, Hunt, actively work at anything?
Yes, I work at a number of interests that I have. Would you like to hear?
I'd like to
something about them?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that I have 5 main interests, really, in life. The theater, the art world, graphology, the study of handwriting, my various business interests, and then some writing, which I do.
5 various interests. Well, now, the reason that I ask about this is that when my reporter visited you at your apartment in the late afternoon the other day, which was a working day, he found you still in your pajamas and bathrobe. Is that your working costume?
Well, actually, I work at home, and sometimes I regret that I do, because the telephone rings at home about every 2 minutes. And sometimes I get started, I start rushing into work at home, and I don't bother to dress, and I just put a bathrobe on, and I remain that way part of the day.
I see. You've mentioned all of these high-flown operations, such as the art colony and the theater and graphology, about which we'll get more later. But you fail to mention the fact that you are also in business in the fashion model business. Why are you unwilling
Well, you might call that, I suppose, a part of my theatrical interest. That's the way it originally started. I started the agency about 10 years ago. And one of the reasons I started was because I was interested in talent. And I felt this was one way of discovering talent was through the modeling business.
I understand that you are interested in talent, modeling talent. There was even a story that went that the reason you got involved in the fashion model business in the beginning was because you were a lonely bachelor, and this was a pretty good way to build a list of potential dates.
Well, anyway, I don't know whether I think I'll just make take the Fifth Amendment on that one. But I've been married for the last 10 years, so it's something that I would hesitate at this point to discuss.
Yes, yes. The other day, I read that Kim Novak, who was a rags-to-riches girl, said that a life of luxury is a sad life, that it's only when you have to struggle, and it's only during the struggle that you appreciate and really accomplish anything. Now, you never really had to struggle, did you? That is, any more than getting a heavy wallet out of your pocket.
Well, that's true, but I think that having money is a great responsibility, and I think you do have to struggle to figure out, to find your position in life. And I think sometimes people with money have as much of a struggle as people without it.
What do you mean, find your position in life?
Well, find your place in life, find the things you're interested in, find out what you're capable of doing. And sometimes it's more of a struggle to actually get down to work if you have money than if you don't.
Time magazine, maybe this is what you're talking about. Time magazine, about 10 years ago, wrote this about you. They said, A&P heir Huntington Hartford, heretofore known chiefly as yachtsman, playboy, and young man about models, has gone in seriously for the arts. Now, what brought about this change in attitude from playboy to philosopher?
Well, I think I was always a little bit of a playboy and a philosopher. I think these have been, I suppose when you're in your 20s, all of us are a little bit of a playboy, at the time that was written. But I always had these other interests as well. And of course, your interests aren't developed enough for people to really know very much about them until you get older. I always had the interest in graphology. I always had the interest in theater and the arts.
Are you what might be called a dilettante? Now, you mentioned graphology and business and the fashion models and art colonies and museum of art, and you write plays. And I think the tendency among some people is to regard you as lightweight, as a dilettante.
Well, I think Aries people always are inclined to jump on their horse and, ride off in all directions.
Aries people?
Yeah, I happen to be an Aries. But on the other hand, I think that most of my major interests in life I've had pretty consistently now for the last, I'll say, 10 years. And the seeds of them started much earlier than that even. My graphology, for instance, has been a hobby my whole life. And I started this handwriting institute, which I have in New York, about 5 or 6 years ago. My,
You mentioned Aries. You take astrology fairly seriously, too?
No, not that seriously. I don't take astrology very seriously. Certainly certainly wouldn't put it in the same category with graphology, which is a very scientific thing.
It is a scientific thing. It depends, of course, upon how it's done, how it's regarded.
Of course, absolutely.
Occasionally, the handwriting analyst is found next to the freak show on the Carnival Midway.
Well, I think that's the main reason that I'm interested in it, because I think potentially it's probably the most important projective technique that's known to psychology, perhaps more important than the Rorschach test, for instance. But I don't think it's been able to assume its right place.
Well, now, wait. The most important projective technique known to psychology. What does that mean?
Well, I guess a psychologist would probably know what I mean. I mean, it'd be pretty hard for me to describe in technical terms what a projective technique is, but the Rorschach test is one. The thematic apperception test is another one. The TAT test, where you have the picture cards.
Yeah.
And intelligence tests are another one. And it's a brief kind of a resume of the personality.
All right. I'm not going to ask you to give us a sample of your own handwriting, Hunt, but what does your handwriting prove to you and to the psychiatrists and psychologists about Huntington and Hartford?
Well, I guess it shows that perhaps I'm a little bit mixed up, a little bit neurotic, and somewhat of a perfectionist. Do you want an analysis?
Well, a self-analysis of sorts. I'm told that you told my reporter that it also showed a certain emotional immaturity in Huntington Hartford.
Yes, I think that's probably true.
And this can all be told just from the way you dot your I's and cross your T's.
Yes, I think a tremendous amount can be told that way. Not only that, we're very much interested in the study of the possible diagnosis of disease through handwriting. That's something we've become very much interested in the last year or so.
Are you serious?
I think there's a possibility, and of course we wouldn't want to come out with any definite statements on the subject because it really hasn't been thoroughly proven, but there's a definite possibility that such diseases as heart disease and possibly cancer may eventually be diagnosed to some extent through handwriting.
Well, now, people who are listening will be very curious about these two things. Do you have any medical basis for what you're saying, Hunt?
I certainly do have a medical basis for what I'm saying.
Where can we find this?
There's a Mr. Kampfer who has been associated. He's a German graphologist who's been associated with the Handwriting Institute now for about a year, and he was working at the Hospital for Joint Diseases, I believe, and he published a paper recently. In fact, it was published through the hospital recently.
But he's not a doctor.
Subject.
He's not a doctor.
He's not a doctor, but it was published under the aegis of one of the best hospitals in New York.
Hunt, are you, with all of your money, your $80 million, are you an easy mark for a fellow with an interesting idea?
I'm afraid I am an easy mark if it's something which interests me and is consistent with my own personal interests. In other words, if it's something connected, for instance, with the theater or with the art world or something of that sort. I'm afraid I have been in the past a little bit too much of an easy mark, particularly as far as the theater goes.
Have you really dropped a considerable sum of money in various fly-by-night schemes because somebody got you at the right moment and interested you?
Well, I wouldn't say that they've been fly-by-night schemes. I suppose it's my own persistence to carry things through, even though they may be unsuccessful.
What kind of schemes and how much have you dropped on unfortunate schemes in the last couple of years?
Well, maybe I've dropped $2 or $3 million in the last few years.
In what kind of thing?
Not so much. Well, unfortunately, it's mainly in the theater, I'm afraid. For instance, I had a musical called Joyride, which was not too much of a joy, which ran out in California for about 5 or 6 months, and it probably shouldn't have run at all, and lost, I guess, close to $500,000.
And your own Jane Eyre.
Yes, I was afraid you were going to mention that.
That lost about $500,000, too.
It did. It lost about $500,000. But I'm afraid that I ran into a lot of unfortunate circumstances there, and I don't think it was entirely my own fault.
Could I interest you in an oil well, say, or a gold or uranium development, or this sort of thing? It's only the arts that interest you. I'd have to come up with some special plan for the subsidization of struggling young playwrights in Cleveland, Ohio.
Well, I do have an interest in the oil field. I'm interested in oil shale. As a matter of fact, I'm connected with a company called the Oil Shale Corporation, and we have a pilot plant out in the Denver Research Institute, out in Denver.
You mentioned Jane Eyre, a play which you wrote and which closed after 6 faltering weeks on Broadway and after some fairly disastrous notices. Why did the play close so quickly? Was it just because it was such a bad play?
Could I take exception to the remark about the notices?
Well, I have a Brooks Atkinson notice here which said that it was 2 parts Jane Eyre and 3 parts East Lynne.
But you did have a Chapman notice, a Daily News, a Daily Mirror, a Journal, and Q Magazine, and that gave it excellent reviews.
Well, why do you think that it closed so quickly?
I think it closed for a number of reasons. First of all, it got some very bad publicity before it came into New York, which certainly didn't do it any good, particularly in Time magazine.
Bad publicity about what?
The fact that, of course, Errol Flynn was in the play. He left the play of his own volition after about 2 weeks, and although I had a 6-month contract with him, he went into a motion picture in Africa. And this, of course, pretty much threw us for a loop because we were without a star. And, of course, we had been planning on this production for, I guess, a year.
Well, now, what happened in this lovely marriage that seemed to be going on between you and Errol Flynn? He quit the show, as you say, while it was on tour, saying the play was rotten, but just a few weeks before he had said this in the Herald Tribune. He'd said, "Hunt Hartford has always wanted to do something important, and now I feel that I would too, so perhaps this is a good marriage." What turned the marriage sour?
Well, I think there were a number of things which happened. Unfortunately, Errol, for one reason or another, didn't seem to be able to learn the lines. He had a terrific problem in learning the lines, and as a matter of fact, deliberately said a lot of his own lines, which didn't help the
You mean he rewrote the play on stage?
I would, pretty much so,
With
yes.
what kind of lines?
Well, he would make a remark while the play was going on to the effect, he'd call out and say, Mrs. Fairfax, stop opening those Coca-Cola bottles, to someone in the wings. I mean, things of that sort were not quite in the 19th century atmosphere.
And I'm told also that he insisted upon having a teleprompter on either side of the stage.
That's right. In fact, he was very upset about the fact that we refused to bring teleprompters to Detroit. Of course, these have never been heard of in the legitimate stage. I must say I sympathize with him. I might have wanted them myself if I'd been on, but
Hunt, tell me this. I have talked with various of your friends or acquaintances who say that you're very defensive in a peculiar way about your money, that you feel that people are trying to take you. You feel that people are interested in you principally because of your money, and for that reason, you become quite defensive. Now, in just a moment, I'd like your answer to that suggestion. And now, back to our story with Huntington Hartford. Hunt, what about it? People say that you are a little defensive about money, that you're suspicious of people, and in a sense that your money has turned you perhaps even against being able to understand and be friendly with people.
No, I don't think that's true, but of course, I suppose anybody who's known primarily for their money is a constant target for all kinds of propositions and proposals. I mean, there's hardly a day that goes by when I don't have a great many proposals of some sort in the mail, propositions. And naturally, I mean, what can you do? If you went into every single one, you'd spend all your time in things you had no personal interest in whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. But isn't it accurate that you feel that perhaps they are more interested in Hunt's money and less interested in Hunt himself?
Well, of course, people who are complete strangers, it's very difficult to think any otherwise. And but I have a number of close personal friends that I don't that I have a very warm human relationship with, and I certainly don't think of them in terms of money, one way or the other.
Money, of course, has made you a celebrity all of your life. Have you enjoyed the attention that it has brought you?
I've enjoyed it in some ways and disliked it in others, I think.
Disliked it because people just regarded you as...
That's right, because usually when when you're mentioned in a column or something, as long as you're well known for money, you're primarily mentioned in connection with the money. And of course, this is something that anyone who is independent and is trying to do something on their own, it naturally, they naturally don't like it.
Your son is 5 years old, I believe, right?
Yes.
And he is an heir to wealth, obviously, as you were. How will you prepare him for it? How are you preparing him? Of course, he's only 5, so you can't tell him much. But
well, I don't think I don't think it's a tremendously important consideration one way or the other. I think the main thing is to bring him up as any normal child should be brought up, sending him to a good school and trying to keep him from feeling that he's any different from any other child in that respect.
But he's going to be made aware of it fairly soon by friends and by attention paid to him in newspapers and so forth. I would think it would be kind of a problem.
Yes, well, I as a matter of fact, it's a little early. He's only 5, and I probably haven't given it that much thought yet.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the Hartford name, along with the Rockefeller name, Carnegie name, is a big money name in the United States. The Carnegie name, the Rockefeller name, we associate, to a certain extent anyway, with public service, with getting involved in big charitable causes. Mm-hmm. The Hartford name, not so. Why?
Well, I think, first of all, I've never really been interested in too much in big causes. Or rather, I would say that I've always wanted to be very closely, personally involved in whatever I was doing. And to be personally involved, if the cause is too big, it's more difficult to be very close to it yourself. In other words, it becomes a situation where you merely donate some money to something and possibly you see your name connected with it, but you're not actually doing it yourself in the individual way that I like to do things.
Well, now you say the individual way. I think that you'll agree that the Carnegie name, the Rockefeller name, means a certain thing in America.
Yes.
What do you think the Hartford name means, or what would you like it to mean?
Well, of course, there's another point, and that is that my interest, I suppose I'm somewhat of an artistic person, and I've always been interested in the arts, perhaps more than business. And my primary interest, I suppose, has been in the arts, in writing, and the theater, and things of that sort, and even in science, from the standpoint of philosophy. And so that I think that I have been more interested in the cultural aspect of things than in the materialistic aspect. I've been more interested in giving my money to culture and that type of thing than strictly to business or to things just connected with materialism.
But always on your own terms. You don't want to participate with anybody else, and in a sense, the cultural things in which you've involved yourself have to have your own stamp of approval on them. In other words, there's not a great deal of freedom. The cultural gifts that you give, when somebody takes a gift from you, he's fairly well got to go along with your point of view artistically.
Yes, I think that's pretty true. Because there's certain things that I'm interested in, certain things I'm trying to accomplish, and I feel that if I'm donating money to these things, I want to see that they're accomplished in a certain way.
Well, doesn't that, in a sense, negate the very reason for art, or one of the very reasons for art? Art is freedom. And why does art have to be made in the image of Huntington Hartford?
Well, I don't want it to be certainly made in my image, but I feel that no matter what you go into, it must have the stamp of an individual on it, or it becomes so diffuse that it kind of dissipates into thin air.
Well, it must have the stamp of the individual, but you evidently want your artists to have the stamp of Huntington Hartford on them.
No, I wouldn't say that. I merely, now if we get down to the subject of painting, and of course I'm building this, Mr. Stone, the architect, is building the Gallery of Modern Art for me on Columbus Circle.
Uh-huh.
And as far as the paintings that go into that museum, I want them to have perhaps the best quality I want to have the best quality of paintings in the museum. I certainly don't want them to be only a certain type of painting. I mean, to me, the standards and quality and things of that sort are much more important.
Of course, there was a big to do a couple of years ago about you and modern art. You took full-page ads in papers across the country complaining about the obscurity and the confusion and the immorality of modern art. Time magazine replied to you this way. They said Hartford's view would sacrifice the adventurousness that often lies at the heart of art for the sake of mild, easy-to-take conformity. What about it?
Well, no, I certainly don't believe in conformity in art. I think there's been far too much conformity in the past in traditional type of art. On the other hand, I feel that art shouldn't go too far to one extreme or the other. The remark, my point of view, which brought out Time's comment, was the fact that I said that art should never go to the extreme photographic at the one end or to the extreme abstract at the other end. In other words, it shouldn't be completely subjective, where the artist thought only of himself. And it shouldn't be so objective that he didn't think of his own individuality at all and turned into a photograph. And I think that's where Time misunderstood my point of view a little.
Hunt, you're obviously in your middle 40s. Are you happy with the life that you've led up to now? Do you feel it's been a productive life, a worthwhile life?
I think it's been partially productive, but I have hopes. I'm still looking toward the future, and I have hopes that many of the projects in which I'm very deeply involved at the moment, and most of which actually haven't come to fruition yet, and I hope will be coming to fruition in the next 4 or 5 years. I have great hopes for them, and I feel very happy about them.
I gather that the family didn't really want you involved in the A&P business. They felt that you were, let's go back to the word dilettante or playboy or whatever.
Well, that's not quite true. My two uncles who ran the A&P, John and George, and John died about 9 years ago and George died 2 years ago, didn't want any of the other members of the family in the A&P because they felt very happy about the way it was going. They had been given the authority by my grandfather to run it, and they wanted to run it without the help of any of the members of the family. And although I worked in it for about a year when I got out of college, I don't think they were too happy about the fact.
Of your working there?
Of my working there, of any of the family working there. In fact, all the rest of the family got pretty much the same treatment.
Was there any resentment on the rest of the family about these two fellows who just didn't want anybody else butting in?
Well, there has been. Of course, we had tremendous family pride in the company and in the job that my uncles had done with it. But at the same time, naturally, there was a little bit of feeling about the fact that there hadn't been as warm a relationship between us as we hoped there might be.
One last question. Most of America's wealthy men have one trait in common. They very rarely have money in their pockets. Could I ask you to reach into your pocket right now? Pickpockets, potential pickpockets who would be looking at you, see that you carry it in your...
$60.
$60. Is that average?
That's about average, I guess.
So that you are not the eccentric who only carries a quarter with him from time to time. Hunt, I surely thank you for coming and spending this time with us, giving us a little bit of a better understanding of Huntington, Hartford.
Thank you very much, Mike. I really enjoyed it.
The fellow who said that love of money is the root of all evil was wrong, at least in the case of Huntington, Hartford. The fortune he inherited from the A&P empire has sponsored an art gallery, an art colony, a playhouse, and his own experiments in literature. We thank Huntington, Hartford for adding his portrait to our gallery. He has taken the profits from eggs and given them to the eggheads. Mike Wallace, that's it for now.